called my dad on the phone this week and asked him which one of his lessons he thought stuck. And I don't know if these are the best of things he tried to teach me, but here's 3 stories that I like remembering and I like telling. So one of the things my dad always taught was don't go after a lot of money. Find something you like to do that. When he was in college, he had, this is in 1956 and 7, those summers, what a heady job. He worked for Remington Rand Univac, and they were the guys with the first computers. And I don't know how the college kid got, except he's a smart guy. And at that time, computers were in a room like 40 feet, he said, by 15 feet, and they kept them at 34 degrees because they were all filled with tubes. And that was the big problem, is how do you all filled with tubes? And that was the big problem, is how do you keep these things cool and working? And it's particularly a problem because the Navy wanted some computers, and there's no way they could put a computer like that on a ship and keep it cool while it floated around the Pacific. And so Remington Rand told the Navy, we'll build you 4 computers with this new transistor thing, and then you'll be able to take it out on your boat. They probably don't call them boats. But in those days, if you're in the middle of the ocean and your computer breaks, you can't call customer support. So my dad's job was to play with this new computer and learn everything about it and write manuals for it. So in those summers, he wrote about 30 different operator maintenance manuals for these new computers that were going to go out on the ships. Then after they finished the job, the guys that were working on, they spun off and formed Control Data Corporation, which you might have heard of. They became the big supercomputer company. Well, 4 years later, my dad graduated. This is in '61. He graduated with his master's, and Control Data Corporation called him up and offered him a job, and they were going to pay him $33,000, which in today's money, that's $256,000. So right out of your master's degree, an offer for $256,000, and he thanked him. But he said, I really want to be a teacher. And so he accepted a position at a state college for $5,000. And he points out that if he hadn't made that choice, I likely would have missed out on a lot of camping. Because we would have been in some fancy hotel. Many of you might be familiar with this Buddhist parable about the guy walking through the field, and he meets the tiger, and the tiger goes into that stalking sort of, and the man starts running, and he's running away from the tiger, and he's stuck at the top of a cliff, and then he sees there's a vine, so he climbs down on the vine, he's hanging on the vine. The tiger is looking over the edge and sniffing, and he looks down below, and another tiger comes out of the jungle, and there's a tiger below him. And about that time, a couple mice come out, a black one and a white one, and they start nibbling on the vine and gnawing the vine away. And then he saw a strawberry growing on the side of the cliff, and he held the vine with one hand, he plucked the strawberry, and it was delicious. I grew up in the Genesee River Valley, and sometime around Father's Day each year, the sweet peas ripen, and you can buy them from farm stands on the side of the road. They come in a brown bag just like this. I don't know if they still do or not. And you buy them in a brown bag, and then we would ride down the road and just pull out peas. And these days you can just eat these things, but in those days the shells were kind of hard, and you had to peel them open and then pluck out, and I don't think I can do this here. And then pop the little peas in your mouth, and they were always delicious. We had a full boat, which is a canoe, and you could take the skin off and fold up the frame. And we used to go on long trips down the Genesee River Valley, and very often my dad would stop and get a bag of peas, and we'd float down the river and eat peas, throw the shells in the water. Well, one day we put in about 10 miles upstream from our house, and we had a fresh bag of peas, and the plan was to float the river and eat peas. But the river was really low at that time, and just down from where we put into the river there were, where there had been an old bridge years ago, there were just the posts left in the water. And the space between these posts were just a little wider than a full boat, it turns out. And my dad decided the smart thing to do was to leave the boys in the canoe and for him to get out and guide the boat between the posts. Well, about the time the boat was about halfway through the posts, he got confident and decided he'd get back in, which kicked the boat sideways and tipped it and bent it on the post, and the water all gushed in, and his boys are sinking down in the river, and he says, "Save the peas!" Well, because of the crush of the current, we weren't able to retrieve the boat, but the peas were delicious on the ride home. Several years later, there's a big flood in our river valley. And we lived in the bottom of the valley, and our whole family, we stood out on the edge of the river, went across the street and stood on the edge of the river and watched these big trees floating by, mobile homes floating by. I mean, this is a big flood. And word came that downtown Wellsville was flooded. And then we heard that the county seat Belmont had flooded. So last week when my dad's telling me the story, he laughed because he said for some reason they failed to realize the pattern that was happening here, that the crest was moving downstream until the evacuation order came. And so the evacuation order comes, and so they drove they drove us up to the top of the valley and left us at a friend's house who lived on high ground, and then he and my mom went back to the house. Well, they had about 30 minutes. And he said he knew that the smart people were taking their stuff out of their first floor and putting it up on the second floor, but the way the stairs were in that house and 30 minutes, and he just said he just thought it was going to be a wasted effort. So they just packed a couple of days worth of clothes, and they were getting ready to leave, and he did one last walkthrough of his home and kind of doing that inventory of things that, that you've decided you're prepared to lose in the rising floodwaters. And then as he's walking through the house, he noticed sitting on the kitchen table a brown bag full of peas, and they were delicious.